you. Prova a parlare.
Good morning.
Ok, non toccare il microfono.
Sì, sì. Grazie.
Ready? Buongiorno, benvenuti allora alla discussione della tesi dottorale di APPU SANTHOSH KUMAR. Iniziamo con un piccolo momento di preghiera, poi vi presenterò la commissione. Ci mettiamo in piedi.
Nel nome del Padre e del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Amen.
Vieni Spirito Santo, mostraci la tua bellezza riflessa in tutti i popoli della terra, per scoprire che tutti sono importanti, che tutti sono necessari, che sono volti differenti della stessa umanità amata da Dio. Dio amorevole, sei stato così generoso con me, sopportandomi pazientemente, guidandomi costantemente. La tua misericordia non mi hai mai abbandonato. Mi ha sostenuto con forza attraverso varie persone. Riconoscendo la tua presenza benevola, ti prego di guidarmi anche ora, affinché possa essere comprensibile a chiunque mi ascolti. Benedici il Presidente di questa sessione, la mia moderatore, i due lettori e tutti gli altri presenti. Te lo chiedo per Cristo nostro Signore.
Amen.
Maria, sede della sapienza.
Prego per noi. Allora, la commissione che esaminerà, già esaminato lo scritto, poi adesso anche al momento di orale, è composta innanzitutto dal professor Francis Vincent Anthony, alla mia destra, professore ordinario di teologia pratica, anche il moderatore della tesi, che ha accompagnato il dottorando. Poi abbiamo anche la professoressa Sara Schietroma, professoressa di psicologia sociale, e poi abbiamo il professor Salvatore Currò, professore di teologia pastorale giovanile. Così abbiamo una commissione abbastanza interdisciplinare per analizzare questa tesi, questo lavoro da vari punti di vista. Bene, come previsto nelle indicazioni pratiche per la difesa del dottorato, il dottorando avrà circa 20-25, massimo 30 minuti per la presentazione, e poi ogni professore, ogni membro della commissione avrà circa 20 minuti per esprimere le loro osservazioni e soprattutto per entrare in dialogo con il dottorando. Altri giudizi scritti più lunghi magari possono essere consegnati in segreteria in modo tale che lui possa leggere con calma, però che si può anche esprimere i meriti principali in modo tale che ci sia tempo per il dialogo con il dottorando. Iniziamo, prego.
Good morning. The theme, context and motivation of the research. India is more than a nation rightly called as a subcontinent with more than 1.4 billion people. There are more than 5,000 castes, 22 official and 400 unofficial languages. Again, people are multi-religious, multicultural, and the country's democracy allows multi-party system. Although there are attempts to uniformalize everything, plurality with its multiple richness and complexity exists in India. The people of India are held together by the Constitution to form a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, providing each citizen justice, liberty, and equality, promoting among all the citizens fraternity. The plurality is safeguarded, but at the same time is disallowing any sort of discrimination. One can identify two movements here. Firstly, the high ideal of safeguarding the individual dignity and the human rights, and secondly, safeguarding the plurality of peoples. Coming to the Christian theology, the divine revelation informs us that all the human beings are created in the image of God, all the more by the act of incarnation. The Son of God has in a certain way united himself with each man. None is left behind in the plan of God, and everybody equally possesses the inviolable dignity that God has endowed. The Church, which is universal, lives and exercises its divine call in space and time according to the culture and the social elements. In this sense, the universality is lived in particularity. Here too, we see true movements, the multiplicity brought in by the incarnation of God into particular cultures and societies, and the universal dignity of each person. In the complex context of India, the multiplicity is enormous and intersecting. The Christian and constitutional push for human dignity and inviolable rights meet with hurdles. Among the Christians as well, there is the intrusion of casteism, treating the other as first class and second class based on caste, gender, economy continue to exist. Socio-cultural inhibitions and denial of human rights are widespread in India. Apart from the obvious cases of human rights violations, there are culturally structured human rights violations that keep the socio-economically deprived subservient. The district of Kanyakumari, Tamilnadu, India, which was part of the erstwhile Travancore kingdom, was a haven for caste domination and subjugation. The worst form of caste system was practiced here. It deprived financial independence to the non-caste Hindus. Thanks to the active mission work of the Christian missionaries, religious and non-religious movements and political parties, the socio-economic dignity of the people was restored gradually. It was a long process of resurgence by the oppressed and the resistance by the oppressors. The people of the region bear the brunt of evils of oppression and marginalization, which continue to dominate in the forms of caste-based endogamic practices and other forms of economic human degradation and treatment. The youth are socially conditioned to perpetuate this. The older generation in a way safeguards these enslaving elements, which is badly in need of purification and elevation. In the given context, the Christians who have received the mandate to gather all the peoples spread throughout the world and form them into a community worthy of God must engage in dialogue with the world in order to uphold the inviolable human dignity and spread the love of God. This Christ-given mandate motivated me to formulate the theme, Youth in the Face of the Other, an empirical study on the practical theological significance of the social representations of the other among the Catholic college students in the complex context of Tamilnadu, India. Practical theology, as ecclesial Christian religious practice, has the material object, the current ecclesial praxis. Therefore, the study includes also an inquiry into the current faith practice of the youth which they make through their interpersonal relationship. Status questionis. Human is created in the image of God, and thereby everyone enjoys their inviolable rights. In the theological circles, the dignity of humans, their purpose, and destiny are the subjects of theological anthropology. Youth and the relationship with the other also come under this topic. In this vein, when we speak about the status of question of this current work, we have many studies in theological anthropology. Since the study is interdisciplinary, the chosen title also resonates the philosophy of Immanuel Levinas. In the second half of the 20th century and later, influenced by similar philosophical approaches, there came up many works in the field of theological anthropology. These studies try to liberate the concept of the other from the abstract theological categories and emphasized on the absolute transcendence of the other who escapes the intellectual voyage for objectification. Here Levinas' philosophy of the other stood unique, and his famous phrase, face of the other, called for attention. Pope John Paul II as well shared Levinas' understanding about the ethical responsibility for the other. Besides the studies in systematic theology, there are also studies in practical theology which have recourse to Levinas' philosophy. Furthermore, his philosophy influenced for the proposal of a better humane youth ministry which would captivate the hearts of postmodern youth. From what we have seen, we can say that the studies done so far are theoretical, although some are very practical in their relevance. Practical theology provides further the space to go to the people with the help of scientific conceptual tools and extract the prevalent meaning of the other in the society. In this respect, this study aims to find the social representations of the other among the youth with the help of empirical methodology, taking into account of Christian theological vision of the other, aided further by Levinas' philosophical understanding of the other. That being the case, this study is both theoretical and empirical and falls within the discipline of practical theology. Objectives of this research. The background of what was explained above, the research explores the multifaceted ways through which the youth face the other. It focuses on the underpinnings of the relationship in peer groups and in other intergenerational relationships. That leads to the transdisciplinary focus on the youth welfare and ministry. This main objective comprises the following specific objectives. 1. To clarify the theological underpinnings of youth approach to the other. 2. To clarify the philosophical basis of interpersonal relationships basing on the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. 3. To study the social representations theory in view of analyzing youth's approach to the other. 4. To analyze and understand the collected data from the point of view of social representations theory. 5. To reflect on the emerging results from the empirical data in view of renewed youth ministry, taking into account of the peer group and intergenerational relationships. Method. This is interdisciplinary research that with the use of empirical methodology leading to the transdisciplinary focus on youth welfare and ministry. Thereby the study has two phases. First, theoretical phase, and the second, empirical phase. The first phase has 3 chapters: the theological understanding of the other, philosophical understanding of the other, and the social psychological conceptual instrument, social representations theory. Within social representations theory, the description is about the dialogicality developed by Markova, which provides the conceptual tool, namely ego-object dialogue. The third chapter of the theoretical phase is not the social psychological understanding of the other, but on the conceptualizing tool that would provide instruments and predictors for the empirical phase. In order to know the current ecclesial practice, the material object of practical theology, there is need to know the lived experience. Empirical methodology sets the platform for this discerning and the epistemological prospects thereby. Within the empirical, this research uses qualitative method. Qualitative research follows the analysis of persons' lives, stories, behavior, functioning of an organization, some social movements, or some interactional relationships. From the point of objective of this work, this research is aimed at exploring the phenomenon of interpersonal relationship that is facilitated by the social representations about the other. It is a search into the ego-author-object triadic dialogue, which is dynamic. Within qualitative research, there are different types, and one among them is narrative analysis. It focuses on the individual narrative stories. The personal narratives becomes the data of the research. Although personal narration is often distrusted, there are reliable studies that have come out. The narrator may speak of things as if they were natural, but for the researcher, they would be useful to get into the cultural and historical contingencies. The problem of truth contained in what the participant says is questioned by many. Narrative analysis approaches truth differently. There are assumptions that the language represents reality. In order to get the youth's personal stories, semi-guided interviews were conducted, lasting more or less 90 minutes. The youth of Kanyakumari district were the participants for the interview. It is the southern district of Tamilnadu where my diocese is headquartered. Since the studies of the phenomenon of interpersonal relationships of youth, 16 Catholic college students were selected for the interview, belonging to the age group of 18 to 25. In the second phase, the first chapter has the thematic presentation, analysis, and salient findings of the social representations of the other among the youth. The second chapter is projective, where the theological implications of the social representations of the other are dealt with. A brief articulation of the chapters. The whole work is divided into 5 chapters, among which the first 3 form part of the theoretical phase and the other 2 form part of the empirical phase. Theological understanding of the other. We Christians confess our faith in triune God or the Trinitarian God. God is one and 3 persons. God is one substance subsisting in 3 persons. This substance in the contemporary theology can be qualified as love. Closer to the scriptural understanding, God is love. The Trinitarian God who exists in eternally intra-Trinitarian love involves the other within himself. The relationship existing between the 3 persons speaks of other and God. God is 1 and 3, numerically presents the other in God. This forms the Trinitarian basis for this chapter. This God who is eternally loving, willed to share his love with the other, the world and the human other. Humans, he created with intellect and will, thereby with dignity. They possess inviolable dignity that none can take away or deny. Christ, the second person of Trinity, incarnated in space and time, revealed the Trinitarian love and the dignity of the human person through his deeds and words. He, in a certain way, united himself with every human person. This is the Christological basis for the understanding of the other. Then the church, the sacrament in the nature of Christ, carrying forth Christ, the light that illumines the whole world, continues to embrace every human being to her bosom. Visibly, she embraces the Catholics who are in full communion with her, and invisibly, non-Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, the beliefs of local indigenous religions, and atheists. She sees in them the visage of God. On this, the ecclesiological understanding of the other rest. Lastly, moral theologically, the Church, through her mission and Indra, forms her children to habituate goodness and love that wills nothing evil against the other, because evil is intrinsically contrary to the goodness of God. Besides this, Scripture presents Jesus as a compassionate human person. He was moved by the suffering of the people. This can be said in Levinas's words, sentient movement of the self. Philosophical understanding of the other. A self moved by sentience reaches out to the other. The philosophy of Levinas catches us this beautiful idea, responsibility for the other before any objectification. He brands the whole Western philosophical tradition as egology, since it gives primacy to the self, or in terms same. He sees it as the ego's voyage aimed at returning by assimilating whatever is different or other. He, through phenomenological analysis, arrives at the concept of the other. His philosophy allows differences to exist, respects the other to be the other, and her or his uniqueness. He sees the command of God eliciting from the face of the other. It is not an universal obligatory commandment, but the vocation of the self to responsibility by the other for the other. This happens through the sentient proximity of the other, who with her or his presence takes possession of the self. The self is held in a hostage by the overpowering presence of the other. If the self fails to treat the other with responsibility, then the self loses its authenticity and real self. His philosophy calls for universalizing the responsibility evoked in the face of the other. Face for Levinas is not a pleasurable object like nose, forehead, eyes. The face is an irreducible mode in which being can present itself in its identity. The individual self can murder this face, the other, since it is vulnerable. Murder is not victory, but self-defeat, exposure of self's vulnerability before the unassailable majesty of the other. But on the contrary, taking the bread out of one's own mouth and feeding the other, a sheer act of responsibility, can consolidate the self, retain its creative originality. The first two chapters conceptualize the other, first one theologically, the second one philosophically. The theory of dialogicality-based social representations, conceptual tool for empirical phase. Having seen the theological foundations and philosophical reflections on the other, this work provides the conceptual tools for the empirical phase. Accordingly, the third chapter deals with the dialogically based theory of social representations. Triadic dialogue finds importance here. Triad includes the self, ego, the other, author, and object. The author can stand for the immediate neighbor, in-group, or other groups, and the remote other. Object includes linguistic, cultural, religious elements formed into clusters, which Moscovici, the proponent of social representation theory, called social representations. So people, in order to communicate to the other, author, use these clusters. These objects make the day-to-day life of the people possible, and it is popularly known as social knowledge or common sense knowledge. These objects are not static but dynamic, undergoing changes constantly through the intervention of ego and author. This dynamicity is possible because of the social cognitions that are functional. Social cognition, unlike individual cognition, forms part of the social sphere where the human make their life through various interactions pertaining to socio-economic and political matters such as embodied cognition, linguistic and symbolic semantic elements, the phenomenon of thinking through mouth, and antinomic thinking. This dialogue takes place through the communication channels, most importantly, conversation. There is also another type of dialogue called dyadic, that is between the author and ego. It can be said as reflective self, a conversation between I and me. This dialogue can retain the conscience, the aboriginal vicar of Christ, and provide authentic self. For the purpose of this research, eliciting from this theory, 3 instruments and predictors were drawn. Instrument 1, social representations contain core meaning and peripheral aspects, and the predictor is their content and meaning are structured in the society. Instrument 2, themata, and the predictor is human thinking in the taxonomy of antinomies or differentiated thinking, example we against they. Instrument 3, communication genres and the predictor is thematization. That is, modification of the existing social representations or additions of the new ones. Having set the instruments and predictors, 5 questions were posed for research. The research findings. The analysis of the data arrived at the following findings based on the 5 questions. The questions are reflected in the titles. Image of God and the other, impact on the youth. This comes as the answer to the first question. In the case of prioritizing human dignity, the basis of the Christian vision of the other, youth take initiative to maintain relationship with others beyond any religious or denominational differences. But due to the interplay of social cognitions, such as semantic elements, thinking through mouth, and antonymic thinking, they fall into the structural social representations that help them to group together in the search for social identity. Consequently, the human dignity becomes a secondary concern. 2. Intercultural dialogue and the social representation of the other. Secondly, this research shows that treating the other on the basis of caste is unacceptable in the campus, so also among the peer group. But moved by the social cognitions, by making use of the structural meanings and contents of patriarchy, caste marriage nexus, they become promoters of caste system and gender cleavage, often with its discriminatory social representations. Therefore, firstly, it inhibits them from constitutional guaranteed socio-political participation. Secondly, conditioned by the social representations of girls in the society, intergender contribution that is necessary for personal, societal, and career growth is affected. The multiple ranking on the basis of caste intersected by male chauvinism and misogyny provide the social space for the phenomenon called Gethu, social psychic superiority complex. It is reflected in the lives of both genders. Those who possess this feeling treat the other as secondary citizen. There is also preference for city life over village. The youth express the view that it is difficult to be free in the village setup. Social cognitions and the other. Coming to the third question, there are 4 types of social cognitions that are operative in their lives. First one is the embodied cognition. There are 2 terms here, body and cognition. Although there are theories related to physiology of brain, here we understand in terms of phenomenology. Body is seen as an embodied agent situated in an environment wherein, without the active intentional intellectual role modeling engagement, the body goes on learning. Embodied cognition is active in the family and other in-group interactions. It is found out that through the research that the absence of father, appa, in the family for prayer adversely affects gender egalitarian embodied cognition and prayer life of home. Second one is the cultural and linguistic elements aiding social cognition, known as semantic elements. An example would be calling a grown-up girl as child by the elders as well as elder boys in the colleges. Thinking through mouth is the third one. There is an actual thinking that takes place through communication, such as conversations, dialogues, debates, and other social interactions. Youth alter their perspectives through their conversations. For example, the social representations about dowry, gender equality, and many other undergo constant change through the conversations in family and college campuses. The fourth one is the antonymic thinking. Differentiated thinking and thinking in opposites, which is part of human thinking, is found among the youth. Good or bad, freedom or oppression, recognition or rejection can be some of the examples. This taxonomy of antinomy dehumanizes the people and leads to the treatment of some as second-class citizens, as it happens in the caste system. Communication genres changing social representations. Through this research, 3 main communication genres were identified. Among them, the most important one is conversation. Thinking through mouth, semantic elements speak of the importance of conversation. Through conversation, new social representations are introduced, that is thematization. This happens at home, in the college setting, in the ecclesial groups, and in any other public sphere. The second communication genre is mass media, mainly TV. There is change in the social representations surrounding arranged marriage or love marriage through the TV shows. Cinema plays an important role. They conserve the traditional values and also introduce new. The third one is social media or small media, WhatsApp groups, Facebook friendship circles bring in the changed representations about the religiously other. It also brings in the ongoing debate over love, freedom, etc. Inner ego alters dialogue, self-authenticity, and the other. Finally, the research also sought to answer the 5th question, that is, pertaining to the authentic Christian life. There is a genuine ego-altered dialogue that takes place among the youth. Some are able to come out of the social pressure that subdues the personal convictions, some others succumb to them, and others are indecisive. Basing on the findings, implications for youth ministry are drawn in the last chapter, Practical Theological Significance. The fifth chapter deals with the transdisciplinary focus on youth welfare and ministry. Taking concepts from the first two chapters, youth ministry perspectives were drawn. They are human, the image of God, multiple identities of human existence, human sentience existence, and enhancing the peer group and the intergenerational relationship. Then taking into account of the social cognitions that are functional in the society and the power of the communication channels that were drawn from the research results, formation strategies were proposed. In value education as a formation strategy, primary importance is given to family. Embodied social cognition that humanizes the youth takes place in the family. In the given context, there is a need of the father and boys to be present for the family prayers. Their absence in the current socio-cultural context inculcates in them unequal social representation about women. Secondly, the educational campuses have become largely impersonal today. There is the need for programs that make the dignified social representations about the other available in the educational campuses. Thirdly, within the ecclesial structures, reflective prayer atmospheres are needed that provide the chances to have personal dyadic dialogue, alter ego, which would strengthen them to filter out the inhumane social representations and lead them to authentic human life. At the second strategy, interreligious and ecumenical dialogues are proposed. They open up the space for the creation of healthier social representations that afford equality to all. Strategies also include formation of pastoral agents and youth leaders. Finally, two lines of actions are drawn without denying multiple other possibilities: networking and promotion of volunteerism. In the context of shrinking civic space in India, Christians, although are minority, are called to engage with non-governmental organizations in upholding the human dignity. Minority are often seen as vulnerable, and there is the tendency to withdraw. But studies show that in the course of history, minorities struggle to uphold the dignity can alter the international policies. Limits and future perspective of the research. This research is interdisciplinary, that with the use of empirical methodology leading to the transdisciplinary focus on youth welfare and ministry. It had the theological, philosophical theories about the other and social, psychological, conceptual instruments for the analysis of data. The dogmatic theological subjects, Trinitarian theology, Christology, ecclesiology, and moral theology are dealt in this work from the perspective of the other. In this sense, it stands out unique. Further studies can approach these subjects from the perspectives of human dignity, related topics such as human rights, gender equality, freedom, justice, care for the marginalized, and can have as theological basis for empirical researches. This applies to the philosophy of Levinas as well. His concept, nakedness of the face of the other, empirically in the experience in the sheer proximity, which Levinas calls as the epiphany of the face, transcends any cultural, ethnic, and other similar crowning. This aspect alone can be studied further with the help of qualitative empirical data. The theory of social representations, proposed by Sergio Moscovici, has produced many studies in the field of social psychology. This theory was further developed by Ivana Markova, having a dialogical perspective. She relied on the communicative nature of humans and their nature of thinking in the taxonomy of antinomies for her new perspective. In order to arrive at conclusions, she relied on the literary works of many other thinkers and their experiments. Communication is dialogical and human thinking is antinomic. That include polyphasic thinking and heteroglossus speaking were some of her important contributions. This current study took up this approach and arrived at instruments and predictors for qualitative or empirical research, which helped for the analysis of the data as well. In this line, the study moving further could arrive at 4 social cognitions that are functional in the social interactions. The first one is embodied cognition, derived from Levinas' philosophy, reflected in the philosophy of Merleau-Ponty. The second one is linguistic and symbolic semantic elements, though found in the writings of Moscovici and Markova, find specific emphasis in this study. The other 2 cognitions, thinking through mouth, which Markova takes up from Bakhtin, but having her unique contribution, and thinking in antinomies that Markova arrives at through the analysis of history and of philosophy and other sciences, are found out through this study. These social cognitions and many others such as group-inhibited cohesive thinking, belief-based social thinking, which is more binding than others, can be instruments for further studies and analysis. The study concentrated on 3 communication channels: conversations, mass media, and micromedia, and that too in a minimal level. The theory of social representations gives ample provisions to look into the other social communications which effect changes in the social representations about the other. especially in today's era of communications and global interconnectedness. The study, in order to arrive at the concept of the other, based itself on two theoretical frameworks which in a way can be branded as Western, but undeniably have universal significance for research in South Indian context. Future studies can take up theoretical frameworks from India itself. For example, Tamil literature is so rich as to provide a lot of concepts on the other. The empirical research found the social presentation around the concept of other, embedded with a variety of socio-cultural and economic elements. In a way, since the other occupied the central place in this research, the influencing factors were identified in a sense generic. But each one of these factors and their influence on the social presentations can be studied further. This study used the qualitative empirical methodology for data analysis, and within qualitative narrative analysis technique was taken up. And within narrative, personal stories were collected and interpreted. Interpretation as well used only 3 instruments and predictors. The data collected for this current research work make 580 pages, having ample data for further analysis. The narrative segments which serve the purpose of this current work research were selected. Rest of the data will be used for further analysis and works by the researcher. Thank you.
Grazie, è stata una bella presentazione, una bella sintesi del lavoro fatto, specificando bene gli obiettivi, il metodo seguito e anche una sintesi dei capitoli nella tesi. Grazie. Ora passo la parola al moderatore della tesi che ti ha accompagnato, professor Francis Vincent Anton. Prego.
Yeah, since you wrote your paper, your research in English, I'll also read out my evaluation in English, and to keep the thinking through the mouth going, I'll ask you some questions to reflect on your dissertation. So at the outset, the candidate, SANTHOSH Kumar APPU, must be commended for identifying a very pertinent research question that addresses a crucial aspect of youth ministry, namely the phenomenon of interpersonal relationship in terms of social representations about the other. It is an exploration into the dynamics, as we heard, of the ego, alter, object, triadic dialogue. The choice of empirical method to explore the theological, practical significance of the social representations of the other among the youth in the complex context of Tamilnadu, India, makes the originality of the present, marks the originality of the present dissertation. With its interdisciplinary approach leading to the transdisciplinary focus on youth ministry, I must say the dissertation attains a unique place in the research tradition of the Salesian Pontifical University. The methodology and the articulation of the dissertation he has already presented, but still I would evaluate it making reference to them. On the basis of the research procedure, namely empirical theological methodology, accredited in the field of practical theology, the dissertation develops in a logical manner in 2 parts and 5 chapters, as we heard. The first chapter of the theoretical phase, in the first chapter, the researcher offers a theological overview of the Christian vision of the other, clarifying its fundamental features, namely its Trinitarian, Christological, ecclesiological, and moral theological basis. I will later ask you a question about the Trinitarian basis. The second chapter that provides a philosophical framework explores, as we heard, specifically Levinas's understanding of the other, as opposed to the egological trends of the other Western authors. This was something new to me, that Levinas criticizes the other positions as too much of egocentric. With a view to consolidate the interdisciplinary basis of the theoretical part, in chapter 3, the researcher, as we heard, takes up the dialogically based theory of social representations, highlighting the socio-psychological framework necessary for the empirical phase. In all these 3 chapters, the lucidity with which the candidate articulates the complex intersecting features of the theoretical phase is exemplary. It's easy to follow what he's saying, and the English also is very good. In part 2, the 4th chapter deals with the research design, data analysis procedures, and emerging findings. With a view to exploring the social representations of the other among the Catholic college students in Kanyakumari district, qualitative method was aptly employed for collecting and processing a set of 16 personal narratives. The language used in the semi-structured interviews was Tamil, with the exception of one case in English. And as given in the appendix, the data thus collected runs up to over 500 pages. I went through them very briefly, but I will ask some questions on that. Meticulous care taken by the researcher is evident not only in the definition of the sample, but also in the designing of the research instruments for data collection and data analysis. Building on the theoretical framework and the emerging empirical findings, the final chapter moves on to draw the implications for youth ministry. In rethinking youth ministry on the basis of the findings, the researcher focuses persuasively and innovatively on youth formation perspectives and strategies, together with some lines of action, a couple of lines of action. I will have something more to say, but before that, maybe we can take up some questions. No? So at the end, I will conclude my evaluation. You assume, in the theoretical part, Trinitarian relationship perichoresis as a basic theological foundation. No? Taking into account Levinas' views, can we say that the inner dynamics of the other within the Trinity would remain incomplete without the face of the human other? In fact, you also make a mention of the icon of Andrei Rublev. It's the best icon that I like. I meditate on it almost every day, imagining it in the morning. So it's very familiar to me. So in this context, you refer to that. Some suggest that the 3 figures seated around the table are awaiting the 4th one, the human other. Is the human other a necessary one for the Trinitarian perichoresis? That's the first question. I mean, you say that this love that is within the Trinity also reaches the human other and all that, okay. But the human other, is he or she a necessity for God, who is trying and who is a relationship, who extends this relationship outside, no? So you have indirectly mentioned, but can you explicitate a little more?
Okay, thank you for that. It's a complex question, I think, but I think I can answer in 2 aspects. First one is more an affectionate manner, because one person who is in love, really in love, that's what Walter Kasper also says, cannot be closed. That is what Pope Francis also says also, no? When a person is loving, it is full of love, it cannot but open, it cannot closed. So in the affectionate nature, that is there. But another point, systematically speaking, from the abstract principles basis, this Kasper also says that God needs no one. He is full in himself. He is full in himself, systematic theology speaking, because that will diminish his omnipotency. So all-powerful God, and he needs no one. And he did not come for acquiring human beings, but to show his love. So there is a descending something that is coming out of God, that necessities, that So these aspects should be together. If an answer means first means he must, but in second aspect he need not be. That may be the answer.
Yeah, but without the human, we cannot even speak about God.
No, because that level is taken by Ratzinger also speaks, because we are given intellect and will so that we may recognize him and adore him, give him back the due respect.
Yeah, okay. Second, the problematics of social representation that you have identified among the youth, in Kanyakumari, would they not call for or be an occasion for a Trinitarian catechesis? When you come to implications, the theological, I'm concentrating a little bit on theological aspect, and the other professors may take up other dimensions. So, it's not an occasion for a Trinitarian catechesis or theological formation of youth, and youth ministers, because you talk about human as the image of God, so the Christological element is the ecclesiological element you take up, and also later you take up, the last aspect, that is anthropological element also comes in. But the Trinitarian aspect is the basis. Can it have? I see, and my questions are going beyond what you have written. And I'm not, indirectly it is there implicitly. So I'm asking you to explicitate. Since there are so many problems connected with relationship among the youth in the church and so on, should we not give importance? In the catechesis, in the theological reflection, for even the pastoral agents and so on Trinitarian.
Yeah, that's true. That it is unfortunate that we project a God whose old father is older and the son like that. We are easy to have access to Jesus and His name, all these things. So we are presenting Jesus as Savior. So this communitarian aspect of church, which is actually flowing from the Trinitarian love, should have been reflected in the catechetical aspect also. But they are trying, but as a specific focus, I think it is missing out.
We always use in the name of the Father, Son, the Spirit, but then what it means, in terms of relationship, is not always emphasized. Maybe one of the implications could be, in the catechesis, to explore this idea because it affects us. And in connection with this, I went through your collection of data, 500 pages, but today it's also easy to verify. Do you find the word God in Tamil? Because the whole text is in Tamil, except for one. In Tamil, there are, as I was telling the professor, Tamil is a classical language, the most ancient, still flourishing. The others, Latin, Greek, we have, but they are all extant languages we are trying to. But Tamil is classical language. So now in Tamil there are so many words to refer to God. In the interviews you had, did any word referring to God emerge when you are talking about the koil, the temple, or the church? Did anything come up?
Yes, normal term they use is kadavul, that is kadavul, as far as I understand, who is transcendent. Everything he is one who transcends everything. That is normal term. It is used among the people. But unfortunately, I don't know. But it's maybe people are less speaking about the name God and speaking about other aspects because of the cultural setup maybe. So that also during the interview, I had to ask intentionally the questions about God, but it's not many a time flowing as naturally from the people. Then the other term maybe Deivam, they use Deivam, then they use Iraivan, sometimes they work. Then almost Jesus is used as an imesu. There is a normal.
Yeah, maybe later in your exploration you can find out, because each term, Kadavul or Iraivan or Devan, means differences, a different way of looking at God, and the person may not realize, but he's using, and then the use of it can, in some way, help the person. Anyway, it's secondary comment, but it may be useful for you to go through. I went through. There are some cases, not too many. And then a third question. With the conceptual instruments of social representation, can we say that you are bringing the practical theological discourse, your reflection, to the public sphere of social engagements, in the college? The college is a public place of study, In other words, your research findings can make sense also to the general public, not only to those who are inside the church. Suppose a Hindu or somebody takes up, he may be able to understand what it means to be in front of the other, So I'm asking whether this reflection you have made in some way becomes also kind of a public theology. That is, you're bringing theology in terms which is accessible to the general public, in a public square, that is the educational field.
That's sure, because when I was conceptualizing the whole project itself, it was my view, because always we restrict God, Christ to our closed circle. It was because in a big circle, we only form only a tiny portion of this. But these instruments, for example, social psychology and the particular instruments used, it is intelligible to the public because it is nothing, it is hidden. Now, the God, the language about God and the talk about the God becomes a cultural dialogue. So, God who is caring for the other and God who is loving the other, these are not strange to them because these are part of them, part of their people. And these instruments can definitely open up ecumenical dialogues as well as intelligence and to the large public, to the atheist also. Because in Tamilnadu, there is a strong presence of this, Thandai Periyar, all these people. The presence of the atheistic thinking, which in an intentional way deny the Vedic gods. So in that sense, we can apply these instruments. Are very useful because that's why the second part, the philosophy is not something to Christianity or something, but it is open to anybody can understand, and it is in the intellectual sphere also. So in that two chapters, I think one is giving a rational basis for what I am saying. The second one is giving a public opening, so that you can come and talk. It is part of the common sense of the people, or it is a day-to-day life. Because when you are meeting in a coffee shop, they say we have to treat everybody equally. Although there are other interventions coming, but the face-to-face interaction tells that you should treat the other responsibly and lovingly. And if someone is irrespecting the other one is intervening. So there is always that. So in that aspect, these findings can open many dialogues in the public sphere, I think.
Okay, let me conclude with the final comments. This was only to warm him up. We discussed many things, but these things we had not discussed. It's completely new to him to see how he can respond, so you can see that he has a grasp of what he has written. The scientific character of the dissertation. So as mentioned earlier, the study takes an empirical theological approach appropriate for the research in the field of youth ministry. Opting for a qualitative method, the candidate has drawn a suitable research design to analyze the social representations of the other among youth. Noteworthy is the use of conceptual instruments such as the core meaning and the peripheral aspects, themata, and then communication genres, in the analysis of the collected data through semi-guided, collected data through semi-guided narrative style of interviewing. The scientific character of the present dissertation is evident in the comprehensive interdisciplinary theoretical framework. He has done a very beautifully connected the three levels: theology, philosophy, and social psychology in this framework. In the findings established through the rigorous use of appropriate methods of data collection and analysis, and the critical and creative interpretations. These observations attest to the standard scientific features required for a doctoral dissertation. Coming to the more formal and technical aspects of the dissertation, it must be underscored that the typographic presentation is excellent, as also we saw in the PowerPoint. Beautiful way of presenting. This is also true with regard to the scientific apparatus utilized. In other words, the lists of abbreviations, glossary, tables, figures, bibliography, and footnotes testify to the competence and precision with which the research has been undertaken and completed. Reading through the dissertation, as I mentioned already earlier, one cannot fail to notice the command that the candidate has of the English language. It flows. It's nice to read. Overall, the researcher has to be congratulated for the dedication with which he has brought the dissertation to a successful completion. With the mastery and conviction and acumen displayed in this research project, the candidate is certainly well equipped to make further qualified contributions to the field of empirical research and practical theology, and to that of youth ministry in particular. All the best.
Bene, grazie per le domande, anche per le risposte fatte. Durante le risposte abbiamo sentito tante volte la parola psicologia, social psychology. Nell'ordine ci sono due relatori, il professor Salvatore Curro e il professore Sassara Schietroma. Visto che il professor Curro ha scelto di essere ultimo, ha fatto la scelta.
Era un atto di gentilezza, però sono contento.
Va bene, anche per cambiare un po' la voce, lasciamo la parola al professor Sassara Schietroma, anche per rispondere un po' da un'altra prospettiva. Prego.
Sì, grazie. Devo dire che cerco di esserci con umiltà perché molte cose non sono di mia competenza, quindi mi soffermo in modo particolare sull'aspetto della psicologia. Allora, c'è qui il giudizio scritto, però ci tengo a dire alcune cose in modo sintetico, per poi lasciare spazio invece ad alcuni spunti su cui possiamo riflettere insieme. Non so se mi segui, se parlo in italiano,
sì,
cerco di
sì,
parlare
sì.
piano. Ok. Allora, intanto ho apprezzato la scelta dell'argomento, sicuramente interessante, quindi rilevante rispetto all'interesse e credo, collocandoci nel contesto appunto indiano, assolutamente attuale, quindi non stiamo parlando di una problematica che abbiamo alle spalle, ma qualcosa con cui nella realtà indiana ancora ci si deve confrontare e che ha poi molte ricadute, molti aspetti anche critici in qualche modo. Quindi il lavoro, quello che ho apprezzato del lavoro è sia l'approfondimento teorico che è stato proposto nella prima parte, che l'aspetto poi dell'indagine empirica che si è focalizzata appunto sul rapporto dei giovani nei confronti dell'altro e nello specifico appunto l'impatto delle rappresentazioni sociali sulle interpretazioni e sulla connotazione delle relazioni interpersonali, quindi non solo un approfondimento del costrutto del concetto, ma anche la ricaduta poi effettiva nel modo che questi giovani hanno di rapportarsi agli altri. Allora, alcune note appunto di merito. Tutto questo è chiaramente indicato nel titolo, nell'introduzione e poi nei capitoli che tu hai scritto, quindi in questo io ho ritrovato proprio una coerenza del lavoro e una pertinenza anche rispetto agli obiettivi che tu ti eri prefissato. Quindi c'è una bibliografia ampia, aggiornata, molto ricca e sulla base di questo hai costruito un impianto argomentativo solido, ben strutturato, articolato, dove le parti sono anche collegate tra di loro, quindi c'è una buona integrazione all'interno della parte teorica e poi tra la parte teorica e la parte più di ricerca empirica. E mi è piaciuto molto, anche se non sono esperta, l'ottica multidisciplinare con cui hai approfondito il concetto di altro, di comprensione e di rappresentazione dell'altro, quindi prima da una prospettiva teologica, che ho letto con piacere, ci ho messo un po' a leggerla, ma l'ho letta con molto piacere, poi filosofica nel pensiero di Levinas e poi psicologica. Anche se la parte psicologica è stata utile per introdurre poi lo strumento che hai utilizzato, comunque ci tengo a dirti che hai delineato bene i costrutti che hai presentato, quindi c'è il costrutto di rappresentazioni sociali, ma ci sono anche altri costrutti e sono spiegati in modo coerente, quindi alcuni di questi li hai descritti proprio bene, anche facendo riferimento alla letteratura, quindi all'apporto di diversi autori. Non essendo tu uno psicologo e ancor meno uno psicologo sociale, devo dire che l'hai scritto con molta chiarezza, quindi questa è una sezione che ho apprezzato in modo particolare. Per quanto riguarda la parte invece, la seconda parte del lavoro, hai esplicitato il fatto di aver utilizzato una metodologia qualitativa molto complessa, perché i metodi qualitativi poi richiedono un'analisi differente e molte volte anche più laboriosa. Non parliamo di numeri che vengono sottoposti ad elaborazioni statistiche anche abbastanza veloci per chi ne è esperto, ma parliamo di dati narrativi che quindi richiedono un tipo di analisi, di lettura e di interpretazione molto più complessa. E, chiaramente indicato il campione di ricerca, ecco, forse mi rendo conto che è un lavoro molto complesso, ma forse avere un campione ancora più ampio forse permetterebbe ancora di avere più dati e spero che tu questo lo possa fare anche in futuro, però è sicuramente un'indagine pilota molto buona, perché già lavorare con questo numero credo che non sia stato facile, quindi un numero ancora più ampio sarebbe stata un'operazione molto complessa. Non sono indicate le ipotesi di ricerca, ma in linea con un tipo di analisi di questo tipo hai presentato delle domande di ricerca e questo è molto coerente e queste domande possono essere utili poi per formulare delle ipotesi per delle ricerche future, quindi anche questo è molto buono. Hai descritto lo strumento, hai presentato le procedure di raccolta dei dati narrativi, anche l'appendice è molto ricca, hai fornito un'analisi e anche una discussione dei dati, quindi da questo punto di vista io ho trovato soddisfatti, diciamo, i requisiti poi anche di un'indagine empirica. Il lavoro è scritto con un linguaggio chiaro, è fluido, è coerente tra le diverse parti e si conclude poi con la sottolineatura degli aspetti applicativi. Anche lì io non entro nel merito di questi, però ho apprezzato come hai pensato come utilizzare questi dati ai fini di un intervento, di un cambiamento, di una promozione anche di valori diversi. Quindi credo che il lavoro si presenti completo, ben fatto, ben armonioso e quindi per me è un lavoro molto buono. Qualche domanda? Allora, vediamo, anzi più che domanda sono un po' spunti di riflessione. Leggendo, quindi non entro nel merito troppo specifico, però leggendo il secondo capitolo, ad un certo punto tu esprimi il concetto di Levinas per il quale la percezione della realtà è diversa dalla realtà oggettiva, quindi parliamo di processi di percezione, di interpretazione. Questo concetto come si collega al concetto di rappresentazione sociale che poi tu hai utilizzato nella parte empirica? Puoi dirmi se è chiara la domanda?
Sì, sì, l'ho capito, but I will search in English or something. English, yeah, cerco di fare la risposta. She was asking about the second question, I think. Second chapter, Levinas, how it has helped for the final part, especially the social representations. Sentience chiamano un affettuoso, se Levinas presenta la filosofia non come un astratto. Il punto di partire di lui è diverso, non partire dall'astratto concetto come di moderni e Descartes e così, no? Perché una filosofia parte dalla Ma in certo senso lì parla della prossimità dell'altro. Sì? Questa cosa funziona certamente nella gente, nella società, perché loro parlano oggigiorno. C'è un affetto e questo funziona sempre loro, in loro, c'è una funzione. Questo aspetto io ho cercato di trovare. Soltanto non perché anche io ho descritto due universe, no? Di elite,
Sì.
anche lì di gente così giù. Certamente quando vediamo il contesto dell'India anche, c'è un processo di introdurre tante cose differenti dalla gente, le cose che vivono. So it is different from what they live. So day-to-day life. They introduce un'altra cosa, una strana cosa, ma non fa parte della cultura anche, perché c'è una cultura di induismo, di casteismo, ci sono tutto. Ma c'è funziona un'altra cosa, quando io vedo un'altra persona, c'è una funzione un'altra cosa. Io non ucciderlo, no? Se non voglio. Ma quando viene queste cose, c'è un'artificialità, queste cose. In questo senso lui mi ha aiutato per prendere questa rappresentazione, cosa funziona concretamente nella gente. Siamo chiamati ad aiutare per crescere, no? di far crescere questa cosa dentro di gente. Questa è una prospettiva che ho avuto quando hai presentato le social rappresentazioni.
Okay. Quindi se ho capito bene quello che tu dici è considerare il ruolo della cultura nel creare questa rappresentazione che non rispecchia per forza il dato oggettivo. Cioè non ci sono realmente persone superiori o inferiori, però siccome io le costruisco così queste rappresentazioni, per me quella diventa la realtà.
No, questa è una differenza, no? Ma rappresentazione sociale non è cosa di introduzione, ma funziona dentro.
Funziona, quindi diventa la mia realtà, sì, percepita ma realtà.
Ma c'è una contraddizione tra the powerful introduce something. There is una realtà contro di questo. Contro di questo è la filosofia della Levinas viene, realtà vivente. So, questo c'è un conflict of interest, conflict.
Sì.
Questo funziona perché no? Non abbiamo dare una risposta ora, una soluzione semplicemente. Cioè, la vita è così differente perché social knowledge viene dalla gente. Questa è un'altra cosa. Levinas tocca questa. Levinas touching that one.
Va benissimo, ti ringrazio. Ad un certo punto nel terzo capitolo parli di categorizzazione sociale. Hai presente il concetto? Pensando all'India, quindi alla regione, anche al contesto che tu hai studiato, qual è la differenza, secondo te, tra la categorizzazione sociale e la discriminazione sociale, di cui tu parli poi in effetti?
Categorizzazione è buono, perché c'è una funzione per funzionare in società anche c'è buono, perché anche la Chiesa nella gerarchia c'è una categorizzazione.
C'è sempre una categorizzazione sociale.
Okay. Ma when I speak, it is a category, it is there are Catholics, then there's non-Catholics, there is a piramide di struttura. Ma discrimination è un'altra cosa. Worker, menial worker, se lavora di lavoratrice o no? In India si guardano un'altra cosa, non è persone di dignità come uguale con noi. C'è delle differenze. That is the problem. There lies the
Hai già risposto
sì.
molto chiaramente. Grazie. Quindi c'è una violazione di diritti nella discriminazione. Molto bene. L'hai detto anche nella presentazione, dove dici che un obiettivo era concentrarsi del tuo lavoro in modo transdisciplinare sul benessere e la pastorale giovanile. Allora, cosa intendi per benessere?
Last question was that one, I think. Father's last question, that was public discourse. So, una discussione pubblica, aperta, no? Transdisciplinary, io penso di no? We are not restricted to theology, not philosophy, psychology. So all these discipline, queste tutte discipline fa parte della gente, non parte dell'elite. Chi studia all'università queste cose, ma queste cose, the Levinas, philosophy Levinas appartiene alla gente, the dignity of God appartiene alla gente, perché questo diviene, that is what is eliciting is not constructed or constricted to that one. It is not costretto queste cose, ma it's evolving to another. So level, it is like your flower, it is coming out. So that can be seen by everybody. Like that.
Quindi dici un lavoro che, se utilizzato, promuove il benessere delle persone al di fuori di queste categorizzazioni che diventano discriminanti. Questo dici? Quindi, ok. Le domande del tuo lavoro, della ricerca, hai presentato queste 5 domande. Rispetto ai risultati che hai ottenuto, quale di queste trovi particolarmente significativo come risultato? Cosa è stato per te, non so, un dato inaspettato, oppure qualcosa che vedi proprio particolarmente utile anche per una ricerca futura?
Mi pare che sono the data there's very big data, the data collected data. So you asked me that what the significance has this which part, which one? It's a question, yeah. Theologically speaking, but theologicamente la prima occupa della prima parte, first one, la prima. Poi personale, la 5, la questione 5, personale. Le altre 3, del quarto non è una social rappresentazione, ma come la communication channels, la comunicazione funziona. Anche secondo anche la modalità della funzione della società, con le cognizioni sociali. So,
hai indagato aspetti diversi. Quale ti ha colpito di più come risultato? Non come domanda, ma come risultato?
Sì, questo mi pare, no, la connessione principalmente alla donna, no? Come si vede la donna, principalmente. Patriarchi c'è. So, patriarchi viene dal castesimo, patriarchia, poi costruisce una società concentrata sulle donne e promuove una moralità nella società.
Quello è un dato che hai trovato significativo, quindi che ti aspettavi?
Si può promuovere una società, questa cosa io ho toccato alla prima anche, per la preghiera alla famiglia anche, si presenta al padre anche lei, dei boys, no? Dei ragazzi anche per pregano, altrimenti diventa una promozione della donna soltanto. No, that result, it was a strange thing because there was an idea, no? Qualche idea c'erano?
C'era e hai avuto conferma di questo. Ok, l'ultima domanda. Allora, la rappresentazione sociale, l'hai anche scritto, quindi è un codice comunicativo di valori, di idee, di modi di agire, di pratiche, ok? Ha una caratteristica che tende ad essere stabile, quindi anche ad auto-rinforzarsi. Noi mettiamo in atto dei processi anche inconsapevoli di selezione di quelle informazioni che confermano queste rappresentazioni sociali. Quindi, secondo te, per promuovere un cambiamento, quali valori vanno proprio sostenuti, vanno promossi, anche a livello, considerando le antinomie di cui parli?
Sì.
È chiara la domanda?
Prima di tutto mi pare una società senza discriminazione, una società. A questo punto mi pare l'ultimo motivo, non soltanto le altre cose. Quando promuoviamo queste cose con tante altre cose, la società cambia. In un senso si manca in India.
Se volessi dirlo in positivo, quale potrebbe essere il valore da rinforzare?
C'è un linguaggio dentro dei giovani, una strana dagli anziani. Gli anziani usano un linguaggio troppo un po' cattivo, nel senso, no? E c'è un cambiamento con l'educazione, c'è un cambiamento. Dobbiamo rafforzare questi giovani con questo linguaggio di nuovo, to accept the other, to respect the other, recognize the other. Questo è un aspetto che penso sia un positivo venuto dal...
Quindi partire proprio dal linguaggio
sì.
che promuova dei valori diversi, come, non so, il rispetto, l'uguaglianza.
Sì.
Ok, va bene. Avevo altre domande, ma mi fermo qui. Grazie.
Grazie. Bene, adesso passo la parola al professor Salvatore Currò per esprimere sempre il suo giudizio e poi entrare in dialogo con il candidato. Grazie.
Grazie. Innanzitutto mi complimento con il candidato, hai fatto un bel lavoro, sono contento di averlo potuto leggere, grazie anche della presentazione che hai fatto prima, che insomma focalizza bene il senso e il valore del tuo lavoro. Quindi anticipo subito che la mia valutazione è molto positiva del tuo lavoro. Certamente mentre lo leggevo mi veniva anche qualche inquietudine su qualche tema e la manifesto adesso nella presentazione, un'inquietudine legata non soltanto e non prima di tutto ai limiti del lavoro, ma alla questione che tu poni, che è molto importante, che, come dire, pone degli interrogativi. È un lavoro che sottende un grande e paziente lavoro di ricerca e affronta una questione teologico-pratica che ritengo molto attuale, l'attenzione all'altro nella pastorale giovanile nel contesto specifico tuo del Tamilnadu. La questione è più esattamente l'essere di fronte all'altro, l'essere in faccia all'altro, youth in the face of the other. La questione è la comprensione che si ha dell'altro nella pastorale giovanile o l'incontro con l'altro o tutte e due. Sollevo qualche questione che poi riprendo nelle domande. La prospettiva è teologico-pratica, ma si confronta con altri ambiti disciplinari, la teologia dogmatica, la filosofia, la psicologia sociale e con alcuni autori privilegiati all'interno di ciascuno degli ambiti, e la ricerca poi è supportata da un'indagine empirica. Il confronto con gli autori è attento e rispettoso del loro pensiero. Gli ambiti di confronto sono attraversati con correttezza metodologica. Mi pare, e mi congratulo davvero con questo, nel rispetto delle epistemologie, delle discipline accostate. La prospettiva del tuo lavoro è di per sé più analitica che sintetica. L'analisi qualche volta, in qualche punto, mi è sembrata forse un po' eccessiva, qualche volta forse faceva perdere un po' il filo del discorso, però insomma va bene. Il rispetto delle discipline altre a me sembra che è molto bene, come dicevo prima, forse prevale un po' troppo rispetto ad una ricomprensione teologico-pratica di questi apporti che vengono dalle diverse discipline. Cioè il lavoro in fondo rimane, e mi pare consapevolmente, di carattere multidisciplinare. A mio parere si poteva osare un po' di più l'interdisciplinarietà, cioè con tutto il rischio che c'è, però provare a ricomprendere gli apporti della teologia, della filosofia in ottica di teologia pratica. Il glossario posto all'inizio aiuta a muoversi nei diversi ambiti disciplinari e attesta uno sforzo di comunicazione chiara, precisa, che si riscontra in tutto il lavoro, a parte mi è sembrato qualche piccola ripetizione o lungaggine qualche volta. La cura metodologica è molto buona, la bibliografia è ampia, per cui mi associo a quanto è stato detto nei due interventi precedenti. La prima parte, quella teorica, presenta 3 approfondimenti. Il primo approccio è di taglio teologico e presenta la comprensione dell'altro alla luce della rivelazione attraverso una progressione che mi sembra interessante, alla luce della teologia trinitaria, della cristologia, dell'ecclesiologia, della teologia morale. Interessante l'accento posto sulla Trinità valorizzando gli apporti della teologia orientale e mettendo l'accento sull'implicazione di comunione e alterità in Dio, sul fondamento trinitario dei rapporti umani, sulla reciproca implicazione di individualità, molteplicità e unità. Il discorso procede nella direzione di affermare sempre di più la dignità di ogni persona, che è evidenziata alla fine quasi come conclusione dell'approfondimento teologico in ottica teologico-morale. La triade individualità, molteplicità e unità è particolarmente rimarcata nell'ottica poi del proseguo della ricerca. Il secondo approfondimento è di taglio filosofico e si concentra su Levinas, accostato come il filosofo dell'alterità, del volto dell'altro e in particolare della nudità del volto. Questa espressione è interpretata come un richiamo alla dignità di ogni persona che precede ogni connotazione culturale e che è un richiamo per ciascuno alla responsabilità. Anche qui c'è una triade. Io ho apprezzato molto questo procedimento triadico, no? Nelle diverse parti, no? L'io, l'altro, l'ille, che allude al terzo, a Dio. Il terzo approfondimento, quello della psicologia sociale, di orientamento cognitivo, valorizza l'approccio di Moscovici, ripreso da Makova, e qui c'è la triade ego, alter, object. Essa è ben approfondita e di fatto fa da punto di riferimento per la ricerca empirica. La ricerca, che costituisce la seconda parte del lavoro, è condotta con molta meticolosità e con attenzione a tutti i passaggi. Ci si può interrogare forse, anch'io mi sono posto il problema, se, come dire, il campione forse era troppo ristretto, però personalmente apprezzo anche e capisco bene il voler lavorare più in ottica qualitativa che quantitativa. Il risultato finale è che la Chiesa, alla luce del Vangelo, deve aiutare una maggiore comprensione della dignità dell'altro in un contesto culturale complesso, multireligioso, che richiede tante attenzioni particolari. Ci si chiede alla fine se il risultato finale, ci si chiede nel senso che mi chiedo, raccoglie davvero la ricchezza degli approfondimenti della prima parte. Allora qui viene la mia inquietudine e ti pongo qualche questione. Io ho apprezzato, ripeto, molto il lavoro, però mi sono chiesto mentre leggevo se la ricchezza della prima parte, mi soffermo in modo particolare sul primo e il secondo capitolo, in cui mi sento un tantino più addentro, non poteva riversarsi di più sulla proposta che tu fai nella seconda parte. Qualche volta mi sono chiesto se della prima parte bastava solo il terzo capitolo per giustificare la tua seconda parte, no? Cioè se l'apporto teologico e filosofico entrano davvero o non potevano entrare in qualche modo di più. E allora vengo a qualche domanda. La prima è più di carattere teologico. L'approfondimento teologico ti porta, come dire, a mettere in luce la comprensione che c'è della dignità della persona in ambito cristiano e questo ti porta poi a svilupparla nella tua proposta. Ma l'apporto della rivelazione cristiana si limita a un fatto di comprensione dell'importanza dell'altro o è di più? La rivelazione, come dire, è in definitiva una comunicazione dell'importanza delle dignità della persona, di questa connessione che ci deve essere tra l'accoglienza di Dio e l'accoglienza dell'altro, oppure rompe un po' anche gli schemi, direi, del primato della comprensione. Se prendiamo la Dei Verbum, lì ci si dice chiaramente che la rivelazione è un'iniziativa d'amore di Dio che ci intercetta in un bisogno di essere amati, nell'entrare in collaborazione con Lui, in una storia della salvezza. Cioè a me sembra che ci sia di più rispetto alla comprensione dell'importanza dell'altro. No? Però ripeto, come dicevo all'inizio, più che un limite del tuo lavoro è una questione che il tuo lavoro pone quasi per proseguire un po' la ricerca e per intercettare più a fondo delle sfide attuali. Non so se la mia inquietudine, la mia domanda è chiara.
Yeah, I can explain in English. I can say the question.
Okay,
I think.
okay.
So it was more concentrating on dignity of the human person, dignity that So not on the other, other concept, the person, the human person, like that. Yeah, and it's only different the pensiero anche. Pensiero. I have also the difference in thinking also sometimes, and my thinking was that the other, the person, the other in the world, the human person, I was that was taken from Rana also, that term, economic, that sense, so that understanding of God comes from the human experience, especially from the first ecclesial community which was experiencing the Jesus, but who was always speaking about God the Father and the Holy Spirit. That was the approach that I maintained throughout the work. I think that approach I maintained. In that sense, my approach of the logical, the process was constrained to that. So I not get that different thinking that as we thought maybe different from that. I think so.
Sì, la mia osservazione parte, come dire, da una problematica pastorale che mi sembra importante, che qualche volta mettiamo al centro più un fatto intellettuale, dobbiamo capire che l'altro è importante, piuttosto che l'incontro vero con l'altro, no? Che implica delle attenzioni sul piano corporeo, direi affettivo, sensibile, no? A me pare di cogliere questo dilemma qualche volta nella pastorale, e questo dilemma lo si coglie anche a partire dal pensiero di Levinas. No? Levinas, come tu hai messo bene in luce, vuole rompere con il primato della comprensione, della visione. In realtà questo mettersi in faccia all'altro non è un fatto neanche di percezione, in fondo, no? Ma è un lasciarsi provocare, e la questione dell'alterità dell'altro è la questione anche dell'alterità di me a me stesso, no? Per cui non è soltanto un discorso di comprendere meglio la dignità dell'altro, ma è una questione di identità, pensata come l'essere straniero a me stesso, ed è una questione dell'infinito in me stesso anche. Levinas spesso diceva che più che di etica lui si occupava dell'infinito per certi versi, no? Non so come questo potrebbe influenzare di più la pastorale. No? Tra l'altro tu non hai citato, parlando di Levinas, l'ammirazione che Levinas aveva per Matteo 25, questa pagina di Vangelo. Lui da ebreo era impressionato. I cristiani riconoscono Dio nel volto dell'altro, nel povero, eccetera.
Okay. That is, maybe I am coming from India, but Indian thinking, I had always this problem of discrimination always, dignity is respected. Maybe that may be different in the European context also, So that focus always remained, because I'm coming to that context, So that was the professor is also speaking. The dignity always mattered in my thinking. That was from the childhood. That thinking has made me to focus. Whenever I read philosophy of Levinas, it is not the admiration of his whole philosophy, but a person is looked at without any pre-comprehension, without any cultural crowning. That thinking was admiring. That I wanted to find out among the youth also. how it is functioning, that was working. So that logic was always working behind. In that sense, in the last chapter also, when I was bringing everything, the last chapter is not a comprehensive synthesis of the whole 4 chapters. That is not the aim of the whole work, but give some indications. But always you can refer back to the first chapters, which provide the basis for what we are saying in the last. So it is a comprehensive analysis of the, or comprehensive synthesis and practical implications of the whole thing. That's why I restricted to 40 pages or something only. That was, I thinking, my thinking also. So that was not to give everything out, but to keep something for the reader to think. That was going on. It maybe in the doctoral dissertation, that was so 2 aspects. One is dignity. I was approaching from that aspect, so that is the way the Reisman, who was proposing this qualitative analysis, narrative analysis, she was saying that this one person who is from that cultural background can interpret the data better, because he has undergone those sufferings or the day-to-day life of the people. In that aspect, I emphasize the dignity, first sense. The second, the last chapter is not a comprehension of the whole thing, but it is only indication that it pointing to some of. That's why I purposefully put it is only some indications like that. So in that sense, I was thinking, maybe.
Comprendo molto bene,
Okay.
lo apprezzo molto il fatto, come dire, che tu hai fatto un approccio alle Vinas e anche al contributo della teologia a partire dalla tua cultura, dalle esigenze della cultura, e questo certamente è molto bello, molto importante. L'ultima cosa, cambiando tema, come dicevo prima, ho apprezzato molto questo andamento triadico, cioè hai una particolare devozione, mi pare, non solo alla Trinità, ma a questo procedere che mi sembra interessante, cioè per esempio la questione dell'io è legata a quella dell'altro, ma nel contesto, no? L'io, l'altro e il noi, no? Pensi, come dire, che questa dinamica triadica sia importante anche in prospettiva di rinnovare il pensiero, il modo di pensare, in prospettiva anche di questo sforzo di interdisciplinarietà che tu hai fatto, se puoi sviluppare un po' di più questo aspetto che ho notato qua e là.
The epistemology was always a problem, epistemological approach. So I was it is a dialogical epistemology that I was trying, and there's a rationality existing among the people in the day-to-day life that is pertaining to that. In that sense, this triadic dialogue means it is not, my thinking is not shaped by myself sitting in the room, but always affected by the other. So that was displayed in this images also. It is the second part. Levinas also, in the sense, I am not a self-closed person. I cannot be, because I am always held hostage before the other. I am not the guest who is ghosting. The host becomes the person who is owner of the house. Now, means the guest becomes the owner of this house. That is the approach. In that sense, our epistemological approaches also should be different, not only situating more. Many times in theological circles and philosophical circles, we restrict our thinking only to the rational thinking, in the age-old thing. That means, the rational thinking that comes from the Puritan aspect. I think that is right. That aspect is not cannot be promoted for a community life. So that epistemological approach, I was not directly mentioning this, but there's cognitions, social cognitions. It is against the personal cognition. So social cognitions, that is Durkheim and Moscovich, both emphasize that it is not a personal thinking. It is outside there in the world. It is part of the world. It is not part of me. For example, a house which is burned outside due to a caste problem, that is not an image of me, myself only, but for the whole society. And whenever that caste people go through that, it becomes a symbol. So that it affects their children also. So it is called a social thinking. In that aspect, there is need for more opening for these sort of cognitions or epistemology approaches that are already available with these social psychological people. There is a need. So that theology also should come to the acceptance of the epistemological approaches that are functional in the social sphere.
Grazie. Va bene.
Bene, molto interessante. Grazie delle domande, anche per le risposte fatte. Ora la Commissione si ritira per la deliberazione. Solenne proclamazione, quindi dovete stare in piedi per rispetto per i candidati che hanno lavorato tanto. Come vedete la commissione è tornata subito perché era molto facile deliberare. Bene, ora arriviamo al momento solenne, più solenne di questa discussione, la proclamazione. Per l'autorità a noi concessa dal Sommo Pontefice e del Reverendissimo Gran Cancelliere dell'Università Pontificia Salesiana, a norma della Costituzione Apostolica e degli Statuti dell'Università, proclamiamo SANTHOSH KUMAR APPU, dottore in teologia, specializzazione in pastorale giovanile, Secondo però, quando prescrivono le Costituzioni Apostoliche e gli Statuti dell'Università, sarà insignito del titolo di dottore e fornito di diploma quando avrà stampato almeno un estratto della dissertazione e consegnato a questa università le copie prescritte. Roma, venerdì 23 febbraio 2024. Auguri, dottore. Ora è il momento per il ringraziamento, ci sediamo un attimo.
So I will try to thank in Italian, with my Italian. Ringrazio il Dio sempre amante per la incommensurabile grazie. Colgo questo privilegio per ringraziare Don Sagaidas, decano di teologia, che ha moderato questa sezione. Anche ringrazio di cuore per la sua assistenza e il suo aiuto fraterno. Grazie. Ringrazio il cuore Don Francis Vincent Anthony, il mio guida, che mi ha accompagnato, ha plasmato il mio pensiero e razionalizzato la mia scrittura. Ringrazio anche i due lettori, il Don Salvatore Curro e la professoressa Sara Schietroma, per il loro prezioso aiuto. Esprimo i miei più sinceri ringraziamenti ai segretario generale, Don Jasov Rochowiak, per il tuo tempestivo aiuto. Ricordo con gratitudine il mio vescovo, Sua Eccellenza George Rajanes Baby, e tutti i sacerdoti diocesani. Ringrazio i membri della comunità Don Ruba, in particolare Don Joyce Tony Curiel. Ringrazio tutti voi amici benefattori. Ricordo con gratitudine tutti coloro che hanno pregato per me e mi sono stati vicini in questi anni di studio e di ricerca, in particolare i giovani della mia diocesi che hanno contribuito alla mia ricerca. Grazie a tutti voi. A few words in English. I thank Father Joseph Thomas, who is my benefactor in a sense, and he has all the way come from Germany, representing my bishop, I think, and I thank him very personally. I think some may be watching through YouTube, a word in Tamil also. என்னை பார்த்து கொண்டு இருக்கின்ற அம்மா மற்றும் சகோதரர்கள், என்னுடைய நண்பர்கள் அனைவருக்கும் என்னுடைய நன்றிகள். Now at last, as a token of my love and indebtedness to Father Vincent, I will be gifting a small gift, but others, and I'm sorry I don't have, but for the reason I have.
Posso condividere con voi? Dopo aver letto passo a voi.
Okay, all are welcome to Aula Don Bosco for il pants. Club Don Bosco, it's Club Don Bosco down.
Bene, grazie e auguri, facciamo una foto insieme. Okay?